Hey Internet, it's Matt here for the Dork Lords. If you're new to the channel, welcome. We talk about all manner of dorkly things here, so whether it's sci-fi, fantasy, superheroes, we probably have a playlist about it. Feel free to check us out. Today is another in our Dork Lord of the Rings segments. And today's topic is dragons. Because who doesn't want to talk about that? Specifically, it's about the named dragons in Tolkien's mythology. And of course, any discussion about named dragons, you can't leave out Glaurung, father of dragons. However, his story is so complex, takes place over hundreds of years. I'm going to save the best for last. So I'm going to put Glaurung at the end of this topic, and I'm going to mention the other named dragons first. So we'll get to Glaurung at the end. Spoiler alert. Okay, so who are these other unique dragons in Tolkien's mythology? Well, you go to the fall of Gondolin. All right, this is in the First Age. Remember, the War of the Ring takes place at the end of the Third Age, so thousands of years after this event. But in I think it's 510, so around 500 in the First Age, Gondolin, this elven city that had been hidden for years, gets found out by Morgoth, sends in just hordes of evil things, and Gondolin falls. So part of that army that's being sent is something called the Beast of Gondolin. It is a fire drake. We know it does not fly, so it didn't have wings. It's like a giant tank, essentially. And it's carrying on its back Balrogs. So it literally is a tank. It carries Balrogs into the city and then lays waste with its fire. Takes out a whole bunch of folks. The hero Tor, who is also, I'm going to mention this guy a little later, Yarindil's father. Just so you know, Yarindil, another hero who's going to come in and play in about 5 minutes. But Tor goes up against this the Beast of Gondolin. Doesn't have a name other than it. It has a title, essentially. The Fire Drake of Gondolin. And manages to hack at its foot. He's got his axe is Drumborleg. And with Drumborleg, he severely injures this fire drake's foot to the point that it shrieks in pain and kind of starts, smashing its tail. It's killing friend and foe alike with fire and its massive tail. Thanks to Tor, it's killing as many of its own army as the opposing army. But that's kind of all we hear about the beast. I don't think we don't know whether it died in that battle or not. In fact, I would think it didn't. If he just hit its foot, and we know that the bad guys won that battle, so probably the Beast of Gondolin survived that encounter. But we never hear from the Beast of Gondolin again, just to the fall of Gondolin. Okay, so that's 510. Now you get to 587. So this is getting near the end of the First Age. And what happens at the end of the First Age is this giant war, maybe the biggest war of all time. It's the War of Wrath. It's where the good guys, elves and the Valar, are trying to, once and for all, take care of Morgoth. Huge battle transpires. And we've got this sense that Morgoth realizes defeat's imminent, and so sends out some brand new weapons. I'm going to read the passage. This is from the Silmarillion. So what we've got is Morgoth is in Angband. Angband is his fortress, and his fortress is at the base of 3 volcanoes. So it's a giant mountain, like a mountain range, essentially. It's Thangorodrim is the mountain range. 3 volcanoes. At the bottom of these 3 volcanoes, Angband, Morgoth's fortress. And from this fortress, he unleashes horrible things. This is the text for that. Then, seeing that his hosts were overthrown and his power dispersed, Morgoth quailed, and he dared not come forth himself. But he loosed upon his foes the last desperate assault that he had prepared. And out of the pits of Angband there issued the winged dragons that had not before been seen. Interesting point there. And so sudden and ruinous was the onset of that dreadful fleet that the host of the Valar were driven back, For the coming of the dragons was with great thunder and lightning and a tempest of fire. But Yarandil came. Remember, I mentioned Yarandil, Tor's son. Tor fought the beast of Gondolin. Now it's Yarandil's turn. But Yarandil came, shining with white flame, and about Vingalot, his boat, flying ship, were gathered all the great birds of heaven, and there was battle in the air all the day and through a dark night of doubt. Before the rising of the sun, Yarandil slew Ancalagon the Black, the mightiest of the dragon host, and cast him from the sky. And he fell upon the towers of Thangorodrim, and they were broken in his ruin. Then the sun rose, and the host of the Valar prevailed, and well nigh all the dragons were destroyed. All right, so a lot to process from that quote. So this is at the end, near the end of the First Age. This is the War of Wrath. This is the moment when Morgoth is overthrown. His last roll of the dice is he releases these winged fire drakes. Never seen them before. Obviously, we're going to see them later with Smaug in the Third Age. But this is the first time we've ever seen a dragon with wings. And there's a host of them, apparently. But the largest one, the greatest, the mightiest of those dragons is this Ancalagon the Black. And Ancalagon fights Yarandil. Yarandil is on his flying ship, and they fight all through the night. Also, I will say this, because it's kind of like, how was he able to even slay this giant creature? One thing that Yarandil has going for him in this moment is he actually has a Silmaril gem, which I assume would have to give him some kind of a enchantment or magical power in the situation. But, so Ancalagon is destroyed, and he falls. His fall actually takes out these mountains, these volcanoes that are, over the top of Angband. It says, he fell upon the towers of Thangorodrim, and they were broken in his ruin. Okay, so this is a very large dragon. Now, if you go online and you just look up Ancalagon size, you're going to find this ridiculous size comparison chart. It has the dragons, and it's got Ancalagon. It's basically the size of like a planet. I don't think he's that big. I think there's a little hyperbole going on here, but yeah, he's a big boy, and his fall ends up taking out at least some portion of, the defense works of Angband. Ancalagon is also mentioned in Lord of the Rings. It's Gandalf talking to Frodo about whether the ring can be destroyed or not. So this is in Fellowship of the Ring, kind of early on. And Gandalf has this to say to Frodo. It has been said that dragon fire could melt and consume the rings of power. But there is not now any dragon left on earth in which the old fire is hot enough. Nor was there ever any dragon, not even Ancalagon the Black, who could have harmed the One Ring, the ruling ring, for that was made by Sauron himself. All right, so more interesting things there. First, we get this reference back to Ancalagon the Black. Gandalf's talking about him over 6,000 years later, so this guy was of legend. He mentions that Dragonfire could theoretically destroy some of the ruling rings. The 3 rings for the Elven Kings, 7 for the Dwarf Lords. So those rings could be destroyed by a hot enough Dragonfire, although there are no dragons currently alive at that time that could do that. But that the One Ring is immune to even the hottest Dragonfire, which theoretically comes from Ancalagon the Black. So note that, though, it's interesting where he says, there is not now any dragon left on earth in which the old fire is hot enough. All right, so what he's saying there is there are dragons hanging out still, but none of them are powerful enough to destroy one of these ruling rings. And that's interesting because, I think I just kind of took that in and, kind of washed over me. And I never really thought about the implication of that because I just assumed that Smaug was the last dragon. Smaug is not the last dragon. Tolkien does give in one of his letters, he mentions that No, in fact, there are additional dragons still in the world. It's just none of the great drakes still exist. Smaug was the last of the great dragons. And so there's kind of a lesser strain of them that still exist. In fact, maybe he's talking about the difference between what he called the fire drakes and the cold drakes. Cold drakes are thus named because they can't breathe fire. And we do get to those. In fact, the next dragon I'm going to talk about is a cold drake. But just interesting to note that even at the time of the War of the Ring, there are still somewhere out there some dragons. You would think maybe Sauron might have tried to harness some of those for his use. So Ancalagon destroyed by Yarndil. Kind of interesting how it seems to take a hero to destroy a dragon. As we see with Smaug, for instance, it's Bard of Dale, right? Bard shoots the black arrow, takes out Smaug. Yarndil flies in his magic ship and takes out Ancalagon, having him fall from the sky. So the next dragon we're talking about, also taken out by a hero. And that is Scatha. What you'll notice is, remember, as I mentioned at the end of that quote from the Silmarillion, it says, well nigh all the dragons were destroyed. Okay, so dragons disappear for a few thousand years. The Second Age, there's no talk of dragons. So that's 3,000 years right there. Second Age goes by, boop, 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 no dragons. And much of the Third Age goes by, boop, 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 no dragons. What we eventually see is in the year 2000, we get a dragon named Scatha. I'd mentioned him in a previous video, but Scatha is a cold drake. We get the idea that the cold drakes basically hung out in Tolkien's version of the Arctic Circle, right? It was the northern waste. They lived in a cold climate as well, and then came south gradually over time. There was also a place in the Grey Mountains. The Grey Mountains is where Scatha ended up doing his evil deeds. But in the Grey Mountains, there is a place called the Withered Heath, and it is reportedly where it's like a dragon breeding ground, essentially. It's a burned out valley, kind of nestled in the Grey Mountains. I assume it's called the Withered Heath because as they say, it's been burned. So that means there's probably been fire drakes there. Perhaps Smaug spent some time there. But I think it also perhaps has cold drakes nesting there as well. So probably wouldn't try to build a house in Withered Heath. Land values would be awfully cheap. But okay, so Third Age, we get all the way to the year 2000. And 2000 is when we hear of Scatha being killed. Scatha had taken over a dwarven treasure hoard, driven the dwarves out. This is in the Grey Mountains, and had kind of taken up shop, much like Smaug would do several years later. Eventually, the Lord of the Aethed, Fram, kills Scatha and takes possession of the hoard. So, kind of again, you're going to see some parallels here between Scatha and Smaug's story. I'll give background on the Smaug story again, but I'm guessing most of you know what that story is already. You either read The Hobbit or saw The Hobbit, but I'll elucidate it once more time. But essentially, Scatha stole a dwarven hoard, much like Smaug, sat on it for a while, and then a human hero killed him. So in Scatha's case, it's Fram. Smaug's case, it's Bard. And then the dwarves and humans got into major disagreement about who should have how the treasure should be split up. So in the case of Scatha and Fram, dwarves are like, hey, thanks for taking out Scatha. Please give us our treasure back. And Fram, instead of sending them any treasure, sends them a necklace made of Scatha's teeth as an insult to basically say, here's your treasure. Hey, I earned it. Hence these teeth. Dwarves don't take that insult well, and Tolkien strongly implies that the dwarves kill Fram as a result of that. So that's kind of the legacy of Scatha. the cold drake. So there is also a drake later on, I think it's in around the year 2500, so about 500 years later, that kills one of the dwarven kings. I believe it's Dane the First. That dragon does not have a name, though, so we'll just say it's one of the more powerful cold drakes. They're doing their damage in the Grey Mountains, where the dwarves are trying to build various societies. It's not working out well. So the dwarves eventually say, heck with this, let's go back to Erebor. And so they go back to the Lonely Mountain. And it's then in 2770, Smaug decides, hey, cool treasure mound, let's do this. Smaug attacks Lonely Mountain, attacks Dale, kills a ton of humans, kills a ton of dwarves, kicks them out of the mountain, sets up shop. Smaug essentially claims the mountain for about 200 years. So, flash forward to 2941, almost 200 years later, and we've got basically the events of The Hobbit. So it's the company of dwarves returns to Erebor with Bilbo. Bilbo speaks with Smaug. We get the idea of how intelligent Smaug is. Basically learns about Smaug's weak spot on his underbelly. That information gets transferred to the Thrush. The Thrush then communicates that information to Bard. And then when Smaug attacks Lake Town, it's Bard that takes that knowledge, uses his black arrow, and takes out Smaug, is the quote, which is actually in the Rankin Bass animated Hobbit, which is a great version of The Hobbit, by the way. But this quote's in there, but this is from the book. Black Arrow, I have saved you to the last. You have never failed me. In all ways I have recovered you. I had you from my father, and he from of old. If ever you came from the forges of the true king under the mountain, go now, and speed well. Interesting there that he talks about the forges of the true king. So we know the Black Arrow was a forged item that was forged by the dwarves. So, it's a little different in the movie version, Peter Jackson's version of The Hobbit. He's got the ballista things and stuff like that. It's an arrow, but it is not made of wood. And in fact, he talks about how he's always able to recover this arrow. It's been a family heirloom all the way from Girion and passed down. So anyway, just interesting to note that it's this family heirloom that takes out Smaug. One note that I thought was really, really cool about this is after Smaug dies, he falls into the lake, much like you see in the movies. But there's a period of time there where he decays in the lake. People just leave him be. And, he's got all these gems and stuff and gold all over him that was, part of his armor. And it's in the lake. And no one's going to go get it. Here's the quote actually from the book. He's talking about the people of Lake Town moving northward after this, just to kind of give a little distance between them and the lake. They were moved northward higher up the shore. For ever after they had a dread of the water where the dragon lay. He would never again return to his golden bed, but was stretched cold as stone, twisted upon the floor of the shallows. There for ages his huge bones could be seen in calm weather, amid the ruined piles of the old town. But few dared to cross the cursed spot, and none dared to dive into the shivering water, or recover the precious stones that fell from his rotting carcass. So there you go. You got immediate wealth just right at your disposal if you could just either be brave or stupid enough to go swimming in and around Smaug's corpse. But I thought that was kind of a really cool touch, that you can see Smaug's bones in the water surrounded by all these gems that no one's touching. So one of the questions about Smaug is, how old is Smaug? We know obviously 2770, he shows up. 200 years later, he's killed off, but he's not. He's obviously got some age on him by the time 2770 rolls around. He has a quote when he's talking to Bilbo, that conversation he has in 2941, that I think is important. He says, I kill where I wish, and none dare resist. I laid low the warriors of old, and their like is not in the world today. Then I was but young and tender. Now I am old and strong, thief in the shadows. There's a version of that quote, I believe, in The Hobbit. Benedict Cumberbatch giving that line, warriors of old. But that line, I lay low the warriors of old, and their like is not in the world today. Okay. I mean, you could say, oh, maybe he's talking about the warriors he killed off in 2770, 200 years ago. But he's not really, right? I mean, those warriors still exist. The dwarves are back. They're, I don't think he's talking about that. I get the impression when he says the warriors of old that he's talking about like Numenorians or the elven armies. So potentially he was one of those, because he is a winged fire drake. Perhaps he was one of those winged fire drakes that Morgoth unleashed at the end of the First Age in his desperate act. And though most of them were killed off, it does say well nigh all the dragons, meaning not all of them, and some of them escaped. So perhaps he's so old that he, crafty, he was maybe a young dragon at the time, managed to escape destruction and hung out for all those years until the right time came and he took over Lonely Mountain. Possible. So there you go. That is basically all of our dragons except for Glaurung. This video has actually gone on a fair amount of time. I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to do Glaurung in my next video. So I'm going to do one video completely about Glaurung. Thank you so much, everybody, for tuning in. If you've got a topic you'd like me to talk about, feel free to put it in the comments, and I will be happy to talk about a topic of your choice. Thanks so much, everybody. Glaurung coming up soon. Bye now.